3 days after we buried our mother, my sister stood in the kitchen, where our mom used to make Sunday pancakes, holding a house key that wasn't hers, and told me I had until Friday to get my things out. Please sit with that for a second. 3 days. When I asked her how she could justify taking the house, the accounts, the jewelry, all of it, she didn't even blink. She looked at me the way you'd look at someone asking a stupid question at a meeting, and she said, she would have wanted me to have it. She would have wanted me to have it. As if our mother, who spent 41 years splitting everything down the middle, who labeled the good china for both girls in her own handwriting, would have wanted her younger daughter to walk away with nothing but a folding chair from the funeral home and a box of photographs nobody else wanted. What Whitney didn't know, standing in that kitchen with her arms crossed and her chin up like she'd won something, was that I had spent the last 6 years of my career reading documents for a living, not casually, professionally, and there was something about the will she'd waved in my face that didn't sit right the moment I saw it. I didn't say anything that day, I just nodded, picked up my box, and left. But I didn't stop looking. If you're new here, this is the channel where the people everyone underestimates get their turn to speak, where the quiet ones finish what the loud ones start. If that sounds like your kind of story, you're in the right place. Before I tell you what I found in that will, and what it took to prove it, hit subscribe and drop a comment with the number of the sibling in your life, 1, 2, 3, however many, who you'd never in a million years expect to do something like this. Because trust me, by the end of this video, you are going to want to talk about it. Now, let me take you back. Not to the kitchen, further than that. You have to go back 19 years to understand any of this. My name is Renata. Everyone calls me Ren. I'm the younger of 2 daughters born to Diane and Walter Cole, in a small split-level house on Maple Crest Drive that my mother bought with money she'd saved from 22 years of working the floor at a regional bank. My father left when I was 6, and Whitney was 9, and after that it was just the 3 of us. My mom working 2 jobs some years, coaching us through braces and prom dresses and college applications on a salary that never quite stretched as far as it needed to. Whitney was the golden one. I want to say that plainly, because it matters for everything that comes after. She was the homecoming queen. She was the one who got the scholarship essay published in the local paper. She was the one my mother bragged about at church, at the grocery store, at every family gathering where somebody's cousin would ask, "So what are the girls up to these days?" I was the quiet one. The one who read too much and didn't say much at dinner. I got good grades too, but nobody threw a party over a 3.8 when Whitney's 4.0 was sitting right next to it, radiant, effortless, adored. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because it explains why, for years, I let things slide that I probably shouldn't have. When we were in our 20s, my mother co-signed a car loan for Whitney after Whitney totaled her first car street racing with a boyfriend our mom never approved of. When Whitney's first marriage fell apart, she moved back into the house on Maple Crest for 11 months, rent-free, while I was 3 states away, paying my own rent and my own tuition for night classes. When my mother's roof needed replacing 4 years ago, an $11,000 job, it was I who found the contractor, I who negotiated the price down, I who drove up on 3 separate weekends to supervise the work, because Whitney was, in her words, just too busy right now. None of that ever seemed to register anywhere except in my own head. By the time my mother got sick, I was 34 years old and working as a document examiner for a regional title insurance company. It's not a glamorous job. Most people have never heard of it. What I did for 6 years before any of this happened, is look at property records, signatures, notarizations, and dates, and figure out whether documents are what they claim to be. I've testified in 3 civil cases. I know what a forged signature looks like under magnification. I know what an altered date looks like when somebody tries to change it after the fact. I know the difference between a notary stamp that was applied in the room at the time and one that was applied somewhere else, later, by someone who wasn't actually a witness to anything. I'm telling you this now because it's going to matter a great deal in about 10 minutes. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March of that year. She was gone by November. 8 months. If you've watched someone go through that particular disease, you know there isn't a lot of time to get your affairs in order, and there's even less energy to fight about them while you're doing it. I moved back to Maple Crest in April, took a leave of absence from my job, and became her full-time caregiver. I drove her to every chemo appointment. I filled her pill organizer every Sunday night. I sat with her at 2 in the morning when the pain medication wasn't quite enough, and she needed someone to just hold her hand and talk about nothing until she could sleep. Whitney visited on weekends, sometimes. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with plenty of bitterness at the time. Whitney had a demanding job, a husband, and 2 kids in travel soccer. I understood, or told myself I understood, that not everyone can drop their entire life the way I did. In July, 4 months before she died, my mother asked me to drive her to her attorney's office. She wanted to update her will. I sat in the waiting room while she went in alone, because that's what she wanted, and when she came out, she squeezed my hand and said, "It's done. It's fair." I made sure of that. I didn't ask to see it. You don't do that to your dying mother. You trust her. She passed on a Tuesday morning in November, with me holding one hand and a hospice nurse checking her pulse, and Whitney arriving 40 minutes after it was already over, having been stuck in traffic. The funeral was 9 days later. 210 people came. My mother had touched a lot of lives at that bank over the years, and it showed. Former co-workers I hadn't seen in a decade drove 3 hours to be there. A woman my mom had helped get a small business loan approved 20 years earlier stood up during the reception and cried while she talked about how my mother had stayed 40 minutes after closing to walk her through the paperwork one more time, just so she wouldn't feel embarrassed asking questions in front of a line of other customers. I remember standing at the back of the reception hall that day, exhausted in a way I didn't have words for yet, watching Whitney work the room like she was running for office, hugging people, accepting condolences with a hand pressed to her chest. At one point, she caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that says we're in this together. And for one brief, foolish moment, I believed her. 3 days after the funeral, Whitney called a family meeting. Just the 2 of us, at the house, sitting at the kitchen table, where we used to do homework as kids. She had a folder with her. Inside was a will, dated 14 months before my mother's death. Not the July visit I remembered driving her to, that left the house. All financial accounts totaling roughly $218,000, and every piece of jewelry, including our grandmother's wedding ring, entirely to Whitney. I got a note, literally, a handwritten note, photocopied and stapled to the back of the will, that said Mom loved me and wanted me to always remember our time together. Nothing else. No house, no accounts, no ring. I sat there in silence for what felt like a full minute, and then I said the only thing I could think to say. This isn't the will Mom told me she made in July. That's when Whitney told me the date on the will she was holding was from over a year earlier, and that whatever I thought Mom had done in July must have just been her getting confused near the end. She said it gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. And when I pushed, when I said this didn't add up, that's when she stood up, walked to the counter, picked up the house key off the hook where it had hung my entire childhood, and told me I had until Friday. That's when she said it. She would have wanted me to have it. If you've made it this far, you already know something's about to break open, and you'd be right. But before I get into what I actually found, I want to know, in the comments, have you ever had a family member try to rewrite history right in front of you, so confidently that for a second you almost doubted your own memory? Tell me about it below. I read every single one. Okay, here's where it gets good. I didn't argue with Whitney that day. I packed my box, I left, and I drove to an extended stay hotel 11 minutes from the house, because I genuinely did not know where else to go on 4 days' notice. I remember sitting in the parking lot of that hotel for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside, both hands still on the steering wheel, replaying the sound of her voice when she said it. She would have wanted me to have it. Not a shout, not even defensive, just flat, certain, like she was reading me a weather report. The room was the kind of beige that extended stay hotels specialize in. A queen bed, a small kitchenette I never once used, a window that looked out over a parking lot, and a strip mall with a nail salon and a check cashing place. I unpacked exactly nothing that first night. I just sat on the edge of the bed with the box of photographs in my lap, going through them one at a time, looking for anything, any proof, any memory that would tell me I wasn't crazy for thinking something was wrong with that will. But I didn't stop thinking about that will. Something about the signature bothered me the moment I saw it, and it took me 2 days sitting in that hotel room to figure out why. My mother had a very specific, very consistent way of signing her name. She'd signed thousands of documents at the bank over 22 years, and I'd watched her sign birthday cards and permission slips my entire life. Her capital D had a distinctive loop at the top, a habit left over from a handwriting class she took as a kid in the 60s. It never changed, not once, not in any document I'd ever seen her sign. The signature on the will Whitney showed me didn't have that loop. It was close. Close enough that a family member glancing at it in a moment of grief wouldn't think twice. But it wasn't right. I'd examined enough signatures professionally to know the difference between a natural variation, which happens. Everyone's signature shifts slightly depending on how they're feeling or what surface they're writing on, and a signature that was traced or copied from a template. This one had the telltale hesitation marks of tracing. Slight pauses where a pen shouldn't pause. A slightly different pressure pattern at the start and end of each letter than in the middle, consistent with someone going slowly and carefully rather than signing naturally. I requested a certified copy of the will from the county probate office, which is public record once it's filed. I requested the notarization log from the notary listed on the document, a man named Gerald Ostrowski, who ran a small notary and shipping shop 2 towns over. Notaries in our state are required to keep a journal of every notarization they perform, including a physical description or thumbprint of the person whose signature they witness. I drove out to that shop on a Wednesday afternoon and paid $8 for a certified copy of the relevant journal page. The name in the journal matched. Diane Cole. The date matched the date on the will, but the physical description written next to the entry did not match my mother at all. It described the signer as approximately 5 feet 7 inches. My mother was 5 feet 2. It listed brown eyes. My mother's eyes were pale blue, the same pale blue as mine. The same pale blue everyone always commented on at every family gathering for 40 years. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time, long enough that the shop owner, Gerald himself, came out at one point to ask if I was okay, if I needed help finding something, and I told him I was fine, just reading through some paperwork. He had no idea what I was actually holding. He had no idea that the piece of paper in my hands, the one with his own signature and stamp on it, was about to unravel his career and change the entire shape of my family. I drove straight from that parking lot to a copy shop, made 3 additional certified copies of everything I had, because if there's one thing 6 years of examining property records teaches you, it's that you never, ever let yourself be down to a single copy of anything that matters. Then I went home, back to the extended stay hotel, spread every document across the bed in the order I'd gathered them, and photographed the entire layout on my phone before I let myself sleep. I wanted a record of the record. That's how careful I'd become in the span of about 10 days. I called an estate litigation attorney the following morning, a woman named Priscilla Nkemelu, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, will contests involving suspected forgery or undue influence. I brought her everything. The certified will copy, the notary journal page, photographs of my mother's actual signature, pulled from old cards, tax documents, and a mortgage refinance she'd done 4 years earlier that I still had copies of, from helping her with the roof repair. Priscilla looked at all of it for about 20 minutes without saying a word, which, for a lawyer, I've learned, usually means something. Then she looked up and said, "I think we have a very strong case, and I think we should also talk to the attorney your mother actually visited in July." I asked her, honestly, what our odds looked like, because by that point I'd read enough about will contests to know they're notoriously hard to win. Courts don't like overturning a deceased person's stated wishes lightly, and I have a bad feeling about this. Doesn't hold up in front of a judge. Priscilla was careful with her answer. She told me the signature analysis alone would likely get us a hearing. But the notary journal discrepancy was the piece that could actually move a judge, because notary fraud isn't a gray area the way handwriting sometimes can be. Either the physical description matches the person who signed, or it doesn't. There's no room in that for someone being confused near the end, the way Whitney had tried to frame it in the kitchen. She also told me something I've thought about a lot since. She said cases like this usually aren't won with one big dramatic piece of evidence. They win with 5 or 6 small, boring, verifiable facts that all happen to line up in the same direction, over and over, until the other side simply runs out of alternate explanations. I liked that. It matched exactly how I'd been trained to look at documents for a living: patience, consistency. Let the paper trail do the talking. Here is where I want to be very clear about something. I did not scream at Whitney. I did not confront her at a family dinner in front of relatives for a dramatic viral moment. That's not who I am, and honestly, it's not what works. What works is paperwork. Priscilla and I tracked down the July visit within a week. My mother had, in fact, gone to see a different attorney that month, a man named Foster Hale who'd handled her house closing back when she originally bought Maplecrest. His office confirmed the appointment from their calendar records. But here's the complication. They had no completed, signed will on file from that visit, just intake notes and a draft. Foster Hale's notes, dated the day of that July appointment, said the following, and I'm paraphrasing his own written words here because I have the certified copy sitting in a folder to this day. Diane Cole came in, wanting to revise her existing will to split her estate equally between her two daughters, with a specific note that her younger daughter Renata should receive her late mother's wedding ring, referencing my grandmother, in recognition of her care during this illness. He'd drafted the language. He'd scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week to review and sign. My mother never made it to that follow-up appointment. She'd had a bad reaction to a new medication that week and was hospitalized for 4 days. By the time she was stable enough to reschedule, according to Foster Hale's calendar, an entry had been made and then, oddly, canceled 2 days later. Canceled from her home phone number, a number that, by that point in her illness, my mother rarely answered or used herself, because her hands shook too badly from the chemo to hold a phone comfortably for long. Priscilla submitted a subpoena request for phone records tied to that cancellation call as part of the will contest filing. It came back showing the call was placed at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, a time when I had a very specific, very provable alibi. I was sitting in the infusion center with my mother, both of our phones in my bag, because she'd asked me to hold on to hers so she wouldn't have to dig for it during treatment. I have a time-stamped parking receipt from that infusion center appointment. I have the check-in sheet from the front desk with both our names on it. Whitney's alibi for that Tuesday afternoon was considerably less airtight. We filed the will contest in probate court 6 weeks after the funeral. The earlier document, the one dated 14 months before my mother's death that left everything to Whitney, was the will actually on file with the court, and the one Whitney had been operating under. Our filing asked the court to invalidate it based on the forgery evidence, and separately, to consider Foster Hale's contemporaneous notes as evidence of my mother's actual, later intent, even though that particular document was never formally signed. It took 11 months. 11 months of depositions, of a court-appointed handwriting expert who independently confirmed what I'd already found about the signature, of Gerald Ostrowski, the notary, being questioned under oath about a journal entry that, once pressed, he admitted he might have filled in based on what Whitney told him, rather than actually witnessing my mother sign anything in person, which is, for the record, a serious violation of his notary bond, and eventually cost him his commission entirely. Whitney's story shifted 3 times over the course of those depositions. First, she said she didn't know anything about any discrepancy in the notarization. Then she said our mother must have been confused about which attorney she'd visited. Eventually, faced with the phone records and Ostrowski's admission, her attorney negotiated a settlement rather than let the case go to a full jury trial. I sat through every deposition in that case except one, and I want to describe the one where the notary journal came up, because it's the moment I think about most when people ask me how this whole thing actually felt from the inside. It wasn't loud, nobody raised their voice. Gerald Ostrowski sat across a conference table in a rumpled polo shirt, sweating slightly under fluorescent lights, and when Priscilla asked him, calmly, whether he had personally witnessed Diane Cole sign that document, there was a pause that stretched on long enough that even the court reporter glanced up from her machine. He said eventually that Whitney had brought the paperwork to him already signed, told him her mother was too unwell to come in person, but had asked her to handle it, and he'd filled in the description based on what made sense, which is, functionally, an admission that he fabricated a legal record. His hands were shaking by the time he finished the sentence. Priscilla didn't gloat. She just said thank you, nothing further, and moved on to the next document like she'd asked him what he'd had for breakfast. That, more than any dramatic confrontation, is what actually broke the case open. not a shouting match. A tired, sweating man in a polo shirt realizing, out loud, in front of a court reporter, exactly what he'd agreed to do for someone he thought he was just doing a small favor for. The settlement, finalized 19 months after our mother's death, split the estate roughly according to what Foster Hale's July notes described. I received the house on Maple Crest Drive, which I chose to keep rather than sell, along with a cash settlement of $143,000. Whitney kept the remainder of the liquid accounts and, at my request, and honestly at Priscilla's gentle suggestion that it would mean more coming from me than being ordered by a judge, I made sure our grandmother's wedding ring was returned as part of the agreement. Foster Hale's notes had been specific about that detail, and it mattered to me more than the money ever did. Whitney did not attend the final settlement meeting in person. Her attorney handled it. I haven't heard her voice since the deposition where the phone records were introduced, 7 months into the process, when she looked directly at me across the conference table and said nothing at all. I moved back into the house on Maple Crest Drive last spring. I repainted the kitchen, the same kitchen where she told me I had until Friday. I kept the pancake griddle. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, if taking Whitney to court, dragging out records and phone logs and depositions, makes me the villain in some version of this story where she gets to be the wronged one instead. I've thought about that a lot, actually, and here's where I've landed. I'm not angry that Whitney wanted more. Grief makes people want things they can't quite name, and I understand that better now than I did before any of this happened. What I can't get past, what I don't think I'll ever fully get past, is that she looked me in the eye in our mother's kitchen and told me our mother wanted this. She used our mom's memory, the same woman who spent 41 years trying to make sure things were fair between us, as a shield for something our mom never actually said. Whitney sent one message after the settlement was finalized. 4 words, "I hope you're happy." I never responded. I'm not sure what I would have said that wouldn't have sounded exactly as hollow as her 4 words did to me. We haven't spoken since. Her kids still send me birthday cards sometimes, through their dad, and I always send something back. That part isn't their fault, and I refuse to let it become their loss too. Some nights I sit in my mother's kitchen with a cup of tea, and I think about that folded note Whitney handed me, the one that said Mom loved me and wanted me to remember our time together, like that was supposed to be enough. And I think she was right about one thing, at least. Our mom did want me to remember our time together. I just don't think it was supposed to come at the cost of everything else. I still have that note, by the way. I never threw it away, even after the settlement, even after everything. It sits in a drawer in the kitchen, tucked behind the takeout menus, and every so often I come across it and read it again, looking for some hidden cruelty in the wording that would make this whole thing easier to explain to myself. I've never found one. It really is just a nice sentence. That's almost the hardest part. It would be so much simpler if the note itself had been the lie. Instead, the note was true, and it was the only true thing Whitney handed me that day. Foster Hale, the attorney who kept those July notes, sent a card after the settlement was finalized. Just a short handwritten line saying he was glad the truth had come out and that my mother had clearly raised a daughter who paid attention. I keep that one in the drawer too, right next to the other. 2 notes, both about the same woman, both true in their own way, sitting a few inches apart, as they belong together, even though they came from completely different sides of this. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever had to fight to prove something everyone else wanted you to just quietly accept, let me know down in the comments. And if you want to hear what happened when I finally saw Whitney again, at, of all places, our aunt's funeral 18 months later, make sure you're subscribed, because that story is coming next. And trust me, it's not the ending you're expecting. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.